There's 16 chapters, and I've interviewed on average 3 people per bank. So it's 48 or so executives in total.
So that was Krista Holloman, and that's a taste of things to come. Now, when you think of banking, do you think of like the high street banks, or do you think of digital banks? So you've got the old world and the new world. This was a subject that I covered recently in a discussion about China's move to a cashless society and how they've gone to the situation where almost like 98% of the population use a mobile phone to make payments. Now, over here in the West, it's been a much slower transformation. And Krista's new book shows the contrast between the old and the new, the incumbents and the challenger banks. And now the reality is there isn't a one-size-fits-all type answer to this whole question about how banks innovate or necessarily what the retail consumers want. In a recent survey by Forrester, they found that 75% of the banks and insurers, those banks and insurers thought that customers wanted to engage via, in quotes, fully digital means. Now, strangely enough to me, only 83% of them, so it's only really 4 out of 5, said that they were actively investing in digital customer solutions. What was clear from the Forrester research was that consumers actually want the best of both worlds. They want the convenience and speed of a digital banking solution, whilst also having the ability for human touch when they need to discuss or explain a particular issue. In fact, 2/3 of consumers want this hybrid approach, according to Forrester. But what do I know about all this stuff? Because I'm not Fintech CEO like my next guest, Krista Holloman, and we're going to talk about the launch of his new book, How Banks Innovate. So good morning, Krista. So how's life with you? Where are you in the world at the moment?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm in London, central London, where I live, my home.
Okay, very, very good. I mean, you and I spoke probably about 5 years ago when you pitched a business you were launching back then called Divido, and I saw recently in the news that you've now raised a 30 million Series B on the business. So you know, just give the viewers a sort of a 2 minutes of what it is you've done and kind of what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years that's got you to this stage.
Sure. Well, in short, I'm sure you and many of your viewers are familiar with Klarna, the buy now, pay later company. So we do what they do, but only the software. So we built an end-to-end loan origination platform to be used by retailers to offer credit to consumers to spread the cost of a purchase. But we just do the software, and then we license the software to the retailer so they can connect to any lender without having to be dependent on the software provided by the individual lender. And we also license the software to lenders that want to compete in this space without building any of the software themselves. So we are that software platform for buy now, pay later effectively. And we started, to your point, 7 years ago. I think we founded officially 2014. And today we operate in 10 countries, over 1,000 customers, including some big brands like HSBC and BMW.
Yeah, I saw the BMW piece. Yeah, it probably is 7 years. It's amazing how time kind of flies. And I think this sort of COVID effect we've had over the last couple of years, we've almost like suspended animation, you know, time. So you sort of think, oh, was that really that long ago that we met up in London? But the reason for talking to you today is about your book, because you've written a book which I can't wait to get my hands on.
Yeah, you can download the Kindle version today, but if you want the hardcover, it's due out 1st of July.
Okay, so why don't you tell us what's the book called and what's it about?
The book is called How Banks Innovate, and that kind of, it says what it does on the tin.
Yeah.
So I've spent the last 7 years collaborating with banks, and I've seen kind of the good and the bad and the ugly when it comes to delivering or executing innovations within banks. And our business model, as you might have then gathered from my brief intro, is very dependent on the ability of banks, not just to license the software, which might be the easy bit. Was usually more difficult to navigate and easier to get wrong is the implementation and the launch and the scaling of that. So we are, as a business, is successful when the banks are successful. So I've been very interested in figuring out what works and what doesn't work and why. So that we can share anonymously, you know, kind of accumulated data and best practices with our banking partners effectively. And obviously what's good for Divido in terms of what's helped the bank's scale is usually good for anything when it comes to launching new products and services. Is highly transferable in terms of the insight. So having had the opportunity to meet with 100 banks or plus over the last couple of years, in this book, I wanted to capture the best examples of how banks have delivered innovation to consumers as well as to corporate clients, products as well as services, from banks from the east to the west, big banks as well as small new banks, neo banks. So basically a really well-rounded view of success stories effectively. And in each chapter is effectively a case study, and it kind of is broken down in a similar way in terms of what's the problem, what's the solution, what was the approach, what were the learnings, what would they do differently, and then kind of a future outlook for where the bank is planning on taking this next. So that's sort of the idea of the book in a nutshell.
Yeah, got it. And I think it's a fascinating subject because you've got this old world, this traditional banking model, and you've got the challenger banks and the neo banks, and you've got a sort of a digital model. And of course, you know, they butt up against each other because quite often the challenger banks actually are essentially just a veneer on top of a traditional model. I love that kind of analysis where you compare, you know, the analog and the digital kind of world. I mean, what would be your key takeaways if you was to say, you know, there's sort of three things that kind of come out of the book? What would be your key takeaways?
Well, so we explore innovation through three lenses: is building, buying, or partnering, kind of classical approaches, if you will. And within each of those segments, we have different examples. So for example, within buying, we have both investing as well as acquiring, which obviously are two kind of very well trodden paths when it comes to accessing innovations or acquiring, you know, innovation and make it yours effectively. But so whilst there are some overarching themes, there are definitely underlying trends that kind of affect whichever strategy you're pursuing. And for most banks, they'll do a little bit of everything. And I think the first thing is around having senior leadership buying. This must come from the top. The CEOs of the banks need to say out loud and publicly again and again over years that we are a bank that we embrace innovation. We believe in innovation. Innovation is what got us to where we are today. And if we want to keep ahead of our game and stay at the top of our game, we need to continue to innovate. So that's the first observation, because if that isn't said out loud, then, I mean, perhaps obviously none of the employees will be thinking that way or be pushing in that direction. So that's the key thing, that the management needs to support this, but it needs to be followed through with something beyond the words. So whether it is dedicated financial resources, whether you're committing a certain amount of money to go towards innovation and making that again public and making it clear that you're serious about committing to this. So it's not just something you say and not really back up with anything substantial. So yeah, making funds available and doing that in a serious way. And I think the third example would be the follow through, so that if employees are given opportunities to innovate, or if they are taking chances or delivering new solutions, that they are recognized for that and that they're celebrated for that. So there's sort of that 360 connection, if you will, from saying that we believe in innovation, financing and supporting innovation, and incentivizing and encouraging and promoting and recognizing employees that are living and breathing those values. So I think that's probably one of the key things that I see amongst these banks that are successful in innovation.
Because that almost kind of takes you into like the cultural leadership type aspects of a bank. Because often we talk about banking and we talk about new banks from a technology point of view. You know, we kind of focus very much on look at the artificial intelligence or look at the way that they've, you know, kind of presented the digital experience, the customer experience. But actually, a lot of these things I've seen from my own experience, you know, it's a leadership, it's people and creating that kind of culture, as you say, for it to inspire and create innovation. You mentioned that the book is going to cover kind of a west to east, east to west perspective. And I am someone that's fascinated by China and the technology, the tech economy in China, and putting to one side the sort of political view of where how you see China, but just in terms of how they have embraced fintech, how they've embraced regulation, and then how they've embraced sort of a customer. What would you see as the sort of key differences or similarities that you see between a kind of an American European type approach to banking and an Asian Chinese orientated approach to banking?
So in the book, we have one Chinese bank, and it's Standard Chartered, which is headquartered in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And the case study that we're talking about there is called Moxie. It's a neobank, effectively. They created a standalone banking app. And the innovative approach they've taken is that they've launched it in partnership with other commercial partners. So they're working with the biggest mobile phone network provider, they're working with one of the biggest travel agents. And that's kind of a novel approach, that you as a bank are partnering out with other commercial entities to create a value proposition that is something uniquely different in the market. So I don't know if that's like a distinct sort of Chinese approach to innovation per se. I think what I've found in the book, that by looking at banks around the world, there's more things that unite us than sort of sets us apart. The underlying drivers are the same in terms of recognizing innovation, supporting innovation, and whether it's in words as well as in financial means, and encouraging people to within their jobs to kind of embrace and execute on this. So I think that I can't sort of point out a point of difference. We all want the same thing, whether we're in the East or the West. It's just to find new ways to reach consumers, or to help consumers do what the consumers want to do in an easier way, or in a quicker way, or whatever it is that could be important for the customer effectively. So yeah.
What's your kind of view? So if you look 5 to 10 years out, right? So we are where we are now, and I guess we would probably say fintech must be, it's over a decade. I mean, fintech must be a decade or so old, right? If as a movement, if you call it kind of coming out of London and the rest of it. But you look another 10 years out, as you see the kind of the challenge of digital new banks and the traditional banks kind of getting ever closer together. What's your kind of predictions? What would you say are the things that you would expect to see changing from a retail banking point of view, that would affect the consumer, the people in the street? They're going to say, well, we didn't used to be able to do that. I always use the example of Amazon. You sort of just take it for granted that you can go online at 9 o'clock at night, order a toothbrush, and it will be delivered by hand at 8 o'clock the next morning for free, right? But it didn't used to be that way. So what would you say is, 5 or 10 years time, or say a decade away, you see for banking?
Well, I think that, some of the banks, or a lot of the banks that I've had the opportunity to work with over the years, they've kind of confessed that they don't do very many big transformational innovation projects or products and services. Wow. For example, they introduced the savings account like 200 years ago. They introduced the credit card or debit card like 50 years ago. And like these are some significant kind of milestones in the kind of foundation of a bank, right? So they don't do a lot of innovation. They're far and few between. Obviously, there are exceptions. Some banks are deploying little innovations here and there, and some banks confuse iterative changes to an existing product with innovation, which I would argue should be a bit more transformational, a bit more significant. But I think the trend that we're seeing, and perhaps is obvious, is that banks will not get away with that for any longer. You can't just deploy a new innovation every 10 or 20 years. You have to do it at a much higher cadence than you have in the past. And that means you have to be willing to take bigger risks. You have to accept more failures in order to kind of, before you strike on goal, or before you kind of find the perfect fit with your team, your capabilities, what your consumers or clients want. So I think that's the biggest thing we'll see over the next 5 to 10 years, is that banks will do more innovation, and more than will fail, and that's okay. But in doing more innovation, they will also find more good things, or launch new products and services that stick with consumers. So I think that's the biggest change that we will see.
Finally, let's just talk about the book and the launch. So you've got a launch in Oxford, I think, coming up.
Yeah, so University of Oxford is hosting the book launch in a week and a half now, Thursday the 8th. And it's going to be moderated by a professor, which has written the foreword for the book, and we're going to have 3 panel discussions, one about buying, one about building, and one about partnering with contributors features in the book. So there's 16 chapters, and I've interviewed on average 3 people per bank. So it's 48 or so executives in total that I've had the opportunity to leverage insights from in order to develop the content. And yeah, so the book is available on Amazon. And if you want to see the launch event, that seminar that I mentioned, or the panel, the best way is to view it on our website, howbanksinnovate.com, which is the book website. The Oxford event itself is unfortunately closed. But the content will be available on the book website shortly after.
Got it. Well, what I'll do is when we post the video, I'll put links in below for all of the viewers. And if when I push it out through the newsletter, then we'll have links for everybody to connect to you, Krista, and to get the book. Okay, so look, finally, let me just ask you a kind of just a sort of a general question. So when you're not running a successful startup and you're not writing and interviewing bank leaders and writing books, what do you do in your spare time? Do you have any spare time?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the work-life balance. And during lockdown last year, I decided to sign up to do my first ever Ironman triathlon. So I've done triathlons in the past, biking, running, swimming, but I've never committed to an Ironman. So I thought, I had no excuses when I didn't have anything else sort of asking for my attention in my spare time. So I thought I'd do that. So it actually got postponed from last year to this year. So I'm doing it in November now. So that's sort of my number one priority outside work at the moment.
Well, there's no half measures in that one then, Krista, is there? Yeah. Well, when I had some spare time in COVID, I learned to make sourdough bread. It's not quite the same as an Ironman, but I tell you, my bread is very nice. I've managed to perfect the culture. Look, it's lovely chatting to you. I wish you all the best with the book. I can't wait to read it, and I'll be looking to download it myself today. Thank you, and please keep me posted. And then, maybe in a year's time, we'll do a follow-up to see whether your predictions come true. So, thanks very much. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate the opportunity.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, I hope you enjoyed that discussion. If you liked the video, please remember to hit the little like button, or hit the subscribe button if you want to make sure that you don't miss the next one of our videos, which are coming out every week now. And if you're listening to this on the audio blog on Substack, hit the little heart button, because that lets us know that you've enjoyed this particular issue. That's all for this week. And remember, insight and information gives you leverage. Till next time.